Thank you, Alistair. So we're going to segue now. I'm going to quote Philip Conkling, who I think he set up an island institute in Maine, which is a very sort of archipelagic
Ah,
place.
I've heard of that place, yes, the Island Institute.
And he says, the smaller and more enclosed they are, the larger the window on the infinite, the farther they telescope into heaven. I think that's amazing. So I always say that the smaller the island, the bigger the islandness. I can't quite
Uh,
back myself up. That's my personal experience. But I also have friends in Australia who say that they experience a sense of islandness. And Australia is obviously one of the biggest continents on Earth. And the same goes for certain peninsulas as well. They stir this feeling of islandness. So my theory, if you could call it that, doesn't really stack up. And I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on this. You mentioned scale earlier, so it's kind of to do with the scale. And I don't know if you feel that the smaller the island, the bigger the islandness. I don't know if that's true for you, but I'm keen to hear what you think about it.
I think provided a place has enough of a critical mass to support a sustained community, then that is true. For me, an awful lot of people seek the environment and environmentalism. They seek the ecological, but they forget the human ecological. And for me, probably because I grew up in an island and I was raised by island people, the human is so important. Ian Crichton Smith, who wrote that essay, Real People in a Real Place, called the book of essays that it is in Towards the Human. And so for me, the ideal island is one where it's small enough to be able to get to know people and to be known, but not so big that you get lost in it. Like, I mean, Great Britain is an island, but it's so big you don't think of it as an island because you get lost in it. Where somewhere like somebody, that was a good Freudian slip, uh, somebody like the Isle of Lewis or Harris or Egg or, well, Alban, Geometer, where you are, Hannah, particularly small, but these small places allow for, well, I'm thinking of an email I had the other day from a man in New Zealand, a curator, not a curator, sorry, a trustee of a town museum. And he was talking about their sense of belonging there and their relations with the, as white people, with the Maori people. And he used an expression that really struck in my mind. He said, there is a gentle sweetness to the town. And I said to him, you know, that's what we need to be aiming for all over, how to cultivate a gentle sweetness in the place where we live, be it a village, town, even a city. You know, we all set the vibe for where it is that we come down.
That weaves perfectly into my next question. In your book, Island Spirituality, you say, the island has a spirit of place, a genius loci that runs through the people. What do you mean by that, Alistair?
Island Spirituality, you can download free online. If you go to the publications page of my website, it went into two printings published by the local history society in the Isle of Lewis. After two printings, there wasn't enough of a local market, so you can download that. It's about the spirituality and religion of the island. It is actually a spin-off, a theological spin-off of a much more major book I wrote, which to me is my most beautiful book. Soil and Soul is my most important book, but my most beautiful book is Poacher's Pilgrimage, A Journey into Land and Soul, where I took a fishing rod and walked through my own island, which actually has two names. It's Harris in the south and Lewis in the north. I grew up in the Lewis part, and that relates to old clan boundaries. But it's also a division created by a mountain range. So in 2009, I spent 12 days walking from the extreme south to the far north, passing through villages amongst people I'd grown up amongst and so on, but also 4 days out across the mountains and moors, fording rivers and so on, without meeting a single person in totally wild landscape. And I think part of what drew me to make that pilgrimage and the extended spiritual reflection, what I call an ecology of the imagination that came from it, is that I'd never walked across the island. It was too big, never walked the length of it. And I felt a calling to do that in order to know the place more fully. And there is perhaps something of scale there. I mean, I remember one day I had a wonderful encounter coming through one of the villages in the north of Lewis. And I had walked down a river. I was heading down towards the seashore, and I took a shortcut following a river down. And an old man, a crofter, a small-scale farmer, saw me coming and obviously was curious to know what I was doing. So he came out and crossed the road and started fiddling with his dustbin. And of course, I knew full well it wasn't about the dustbin. He was wanting an opportunity to find out who I was and what I was about. So, of course, in no time, I'm sitting around the kitchen table and the kettle's on and all the rest of it. And consistent with the island spirituality, the lady of the house pours a cup of tea and looks at me and says, "And will we be having a grace?" So, of course, as a guest, I'm expected to say grace. So, slightly embarrassed, I say a suitably short grace. And she gives me a slightly withering look and says, "Well, if that will be your grace," because the joke in the island is that if the tea has not had time to get cold, the grace has not been long enough. So we had this wonderful afternoon together. But then as I set off to go on my way again, I asked him for his advice about crossing land further to the north, where there were some cliffs and fences coming down, and I had a heavy pack on, so I was wondering how easy it would be to get around the edges of the fences without having to jump the fences, given the cliffs. And he says, "Oh, I don't know, I've never been up there." Now, this was a man in his probably early 80s at the time. And I was talking about just a little bit further north from where he was. And he says, "I've never been past such and such a place along the coast, about a mile to the north. You know, here the man of the land with sheep and cows and what have you." But he had never had cows. And at first I thought, well, that's ridiculous. But then I thought about our childhood. And I thought, you know, in actual fact, we hardly ever ventured, unless we went in a car, on our bikes or on foot, we never ventured more than a mile or at most 2 miles away from home. We could easily have done so. It's just that there was such sufficiency around us. You know, in that kind of life, you don't go for a walk just for the sake of it. You only go for the purpose. And he'd evidently never had purpose to walk up where I was going to be walking. He'd never been there. Yeah, there's a sense for you of what the locus of an island is. His island was actually quite small.
I have exactly the same thing, Alistair. I've been a very nomadic, roving person for many, many years, including in the Hebrides, which you can rove in. You know, it's an archipelago with hundreds, if not thousands, of islands, depending on your definition of island. But ever since I decided to live here, I've barely gone to another island at all. I've just gone round and round and round and round and round and round, and it's like a Russian doll. I feel like islands have small islands. You have to kind of work hard, but they have this infinite kind of interiority, you know. So bringing it back to the contemporary, I suppose. So our culture, when I say our culture, I mean the kind of homogenized, modernized, consumerist culture that we're all sort of ailing under, is not very good at handling, and I don't want to sound too academic here, but I'm afraid I'm going to, is not very good at handling plurality and paradox. So it wants one truth. It wants a kind of centralized, homogenized kind of metaphysics. And the reason islands are so fascinating to me related to this is because they shake that up a lot. And one example of this, or two examples. One is that in an island, you are connected and separated at the same time. And then a practical example is that an island can be very what people would call eco-friendly, what some other people might even call primitive. And at the same time, these islands are becoming more and more dependent on fossil fuels and technology. So it really gets into the more, I suppose, of this problem. And I wonder what your thoughts are on this. There isn't a very clear question in there, but it was about plurality and paradox and how islands cut through this kind of homogenized either or, black or white thinking that the dominant culture proliferates. That was a long question.
Yeah, I think I'm failing to find that poem. I'm sorry, I must give up on it. I think it's to do with when you can't hide from yourself in the same way. And when you can't hide yourself from others, and others can't hide themselves from their neighbors, it presses you either into a hole of your own making where you shut off from things. And you do see some people do that. Some people become sort of hermits in islands. Or more often, it presses you to become very tolerant of other human beings, to accept pronounced political, religious, and other values differences, and to understand that inasmuch as you might judge others, others will judge you, and that there is a certain beauty to be found in acceptance of each other and ourselves as we are. I'm sure what I'm saying there would come about in any close community, but it's certainly something I notice in islands. There is no bullshitting. And it's why island people often feel when they come to the cities, we feel the falseness, we feel the closeness. We notice people not able to face, literally not able to face one another. And I'm just aware I need to throw in caveats there that there can be right cussedness, there can be feuds that go on for generations and so on. I have a friend just now in Skye who's dealing with the ongoing has dealt very well with the ongoing aftermath of a long intergenerational family feud. I don't suppose that many people outside this network are going to listen to this recording, but the most incredible reconciliation of it came about one day when he was down on his croft, down on his piece of land, was a scythe. You know what I mean by a scythe? A huge big blade for cutting the hay. And he was cutting through some rushes, swinging the scythe. And all of a sudden, he saw a slight movement amongst the rushes where he was about to, where his swing was moving towards. He just stayed the grip on the scythe. And there he saw a hen sitting on her nest with a clutch of chickens already hatched, just newly hatched out chickens, and other eggs about to be hatched. And he had almost sliced the head of this chicken. And he realized it was the missing chicken belonging to the neighbor of the family with which there had been this feud, and with whom there was a prickly relationship. And he went up to her house and he said, "I've found your hen." And she was so delighted because she had her grandchildren coming to stay that day. And here was a clutch of chickens. And since then, it's been a very different relationship. And that kind of thing can only happen when you are viscerally connected together with one another.
Just aware of the time, Alistair, but I'm gonna be a very poor facilitator and squeeze in another one of my own
Let's
questions.
make a quick one so we can get to questions. I'd
Yeah,
love to
before we
hear
go
people's
over, because
voices if we can.
I feel like this one will wrap it up nicely. So, our mutual friend, the Iona artist Fari Killin, said that an island is like a space in my heart. And I feel like
Oh,
islandness is kind of portable in this way. And so I wanted to ask you, how does islandness appear in your life now that you're not living in Lewis?
I'm always connected to it. You know, I say at the beginning of Poacher's Pilgrimage, I felt drawn to go on the pilgrimage because the island was pulling at me like an umbilical cord under the sea. We have this expression, the carrying stream. Um, oh, here it is. I had it out for a Zoom just last night. The carrying stream flows on. Can you see that? I don't know if that will focus or not. The carrying stream flows on. A collection celebrating the School of Scottish Studies at Edinburgh University. And by the carrying stream, we mean, look what's underneath. I've got mackerel feathers for fishing with, you know, and this is island things just all around naturally here. Um, I even have the produce of the island here, although unfortunately empty. It's all around. By the carrying stream, what we mean is the collective unconscious of the place. A sense that we join together at a very deep level. In Advaya, you talk about non-dividedness, that everything is one. I would say my experience of, especially with the people I grew up amongst, is very much a sense that we're all in this together. And it shows in such funny, tiny little ways. You know, a school friend who I've known since the age of 4, texting me yesterday to say he was going to the doctor's surgery for a checkup and he'd need to have a shower before he went. And this is a man who lives with his sister. His sister's got dementia. He cares for her. He's very isolated because of that. He can't leave the home for long, but he just sends a text telling me basically he's going for a shower. And it sounds ridiculous, but there's also something endearingly warm about it. There is a gentle sweetness to the town, as a man from New Zealand put it. And I would say to all of us here, whether we live on islands or more likely not, consider cultivating that. Consider building community. Weaving, I call it the basket of community. Like, you know, you have the warp going out, often at warp speed and separating in modern society. But in community, you weave it together with what we call the weft. I think in America they call it the woof. And our task in building community is to take the warp at warp speed of our time, but to bind it into a basket that can hold human kindness and loving kindness. You know, in the old Scottish theological texts, they use loving kindness as one word, not as two. I was quite annoyed the other day when I saw when I'd used it in one of my books, a copy editor split it into 2 words. But consider holding loving kindness as one word.